I felt like my life was off in terms of my integrity. I couldn't figure it out, point it together, like what is it? And so I ended up resetting my entire life. I walked away from my entire life. I had 2 successful companies. I was in cutting edge neurotech. I was at a center, been running for a decade. I spent a decade building a life that I wanted in a posh neighborhood, living relatively well, blah, 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 all of the different things.
Hello.
Hi, Phoenix. How's it going? Can you hear me?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you. All right. Awesome. So you are in London or where?
I'm in the UK, but not in London in particular. I'm about 2.5 hours, 3 hours away.
Okay. North? Based on your eyes, you kind of...
West.
Okay. All right. So you're still in England.
Yes. I'm like at the border with Wales.
Okay.
Like Wales is like 20 minutes drive.
Okay. Where my last name comes from is Wales.
Where are you? So where are you originally from?
I'm originally from Canada. I've been in Canada. My family's been in Canada for a really long time. So.
Oh wow. So what about your name then? Because you said it's Wales.
Yeah, the Richard last name. It's went to France for a while, and then after it was in like Welsh Wales kind of space, and then went to France, became Richard, and then I came to Canada, and New France. It's all really old name. Comes from like I believe, if I have it correct, from Richard the Lionheart.
Oh wow.
And that kind of stuff. So yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So where do you live now?
I live east of the Canadian Rockies. If you're not familiar with the Rockies, it's a big chain of. It's kind of like your Alps, the version of the Alps in Europe, but in North America. Yeah. So I'm a couple of.
So you're in Canada.
Yeah, I'm in Canada. I love Canada by and large.
I have a friend that lives in Ottawa, I think. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, it's very interesting. Anyway, so nice to meet you.
Yeah,
nice to meet you. I don't know where to start. I never know where to start these things. I just get in and that's it. Basically, I'm like I don't seem to have a structure, which I'm kind of okay with and not okay with. It's like I'm in between with where I go and what I do. I just like to kind of get a feel of what the person in front of me is like somehow, and just go from there. So that's what I want. I don't want people to be all structured and I don't know, stiff somehow, if that makes sense. But of course, everybody's different. So if that comes up, that comes up.
Yeah, I go on the aspect of whoever I'm having a conversation with, whether it's a podcast or whatever, they have some sort of information or breadth of understanding about something, and then it'll just naturally open up. And then because they have so much knowledge about it, it kind of becomes structure in it anyhow, because they have a lot of knowledge about it. But yeah.
Well, I may not have no knowledge.
I mean, you know more about podcasting than I do. So
you assume you're assuming you don't know how much I know about podcasting. I've literally started it a few months ago, so I'm very new in it. But I do watch a lot, so I've watched a lot of people. Maybe that's got anything to do with it, maybe not. But anyway,
yeah, I was trying to figure out the name of your podcast. So is it Phoenix's studio, or gigs, or do you have a name? So like, hey, I'm searching for such and such podcast. What is it?
I mean, I haven't figured that part out. See, this is the thing. In the process of what's been happening so far, I do realize that the name Phoenix kind of works for a lot of it, because it's, in my view, it's the stories of the people that are in here and how they've overcome things, let's say, or how they've become the person that they are. So it's the rebirth of the person. So it is, at the moment, it really is just Phoenix, which is my name as well.
Yeah.
So,
this painting is my first painting after a major life overhaul, a reset. I've never did a painting before. This is called Birth of a Phoenix. In that kind of aspect. So yeah.
I love that. Gigs, by the way, because Gigs, you saw Gigs somewhere. Yeah. Gigs is one of my nicknames. I've got so many names, and it's short for giggles. I'm sure that you've already caught up on that. because I am made of that. And more recently, I'm part of this course that I'm taking that's called Quadrant Theory. I can never say it, and it's based on Jill Boltes Taylor idea of there's 4 characters in our brains, and I even figured out, because throughout my life I've changed my, I'm already talking about myself already. Anyway, I've changed my name throughout my life so many times, and Phoenix is my quadrant 4, which is the wise old self, basically. Gigs is my excited little child, which is quadrant 3. Then I've got my birth name, which is Ioana, which is quadrant 2, which is the inner child, but the wounded one, but the emotional one. So there's positives and negatives to all of them. And then there's Jojo, which is my quadrant 1, which is the goer, the doer, the I'm in charge of all this stuff, which I didn't even realize, like, throughout my life, my names have changed a lot. And Phoenix is the most recent one.
Cool.
So there we go. There's a little bit of me. Now, let's get into this and start with, if you would like to introduce yourself a little bit and tell everybody that's watching, listening, who you are. And wow, it's so interesting, because every time I ask that question, who you are and what you're doing, it's like that's the most basic and stupid question anybody could ask, because it's not who you are, right? It's just the physical form that you're taking and the labels that you attach onto yourself. But for lack of other question right now.
Cool. All right. So thanks for having me on here, and I guess we're calling this Phoenix. I appreciate that, and appreciate that, Phoenix. So I have a few different names, just as you do. I go by Daniel right now. So who am I and all that kind of stuff. And basically, people want the answer of like, what do I do, more than who I am. So I have a whole bunch of stuff that I do. One of where I got into this podcast with you is a post around World Peace and Freedom Project that I'm running and creating. This is my third one that I'm running. So my previous 2, one which was Indigenous, I was in the center circle of it. The other one was meditation focused, and I was in the center circle of that one as well. Both of them are very large groups that predominantly went around the entire world. The Indigenous one stayed mostly in Turtle Island or North America and that kind of aspect. The meditation one went globally, had a lot of spiritual celebrities and different things like that. And the focus in that was that if you could get meditation together and enough people meditating, that you could increase peace in the world and all that kind of aspect. So there's some loose research that backs that. So that's what kind of got me here. To answer your question about who I am, I don't know. That's a tough one. I go by my name. I'm a man. I'm a dad. I'm this and that. All these labels of like all these pictures that people, collect over the years about who their identity is. But at the very simplest of it, I'm a being in a body that's experiencing life, doing stuff, I guess. And right now, I'm on a bent towards world peace.
Boom. That's it. That could be the end of it. I love how the synchronicities are already happening, with the Phoenix and that Freedom Project. So how did you get to where you are right now? I'm thinking, would you like to share a little bit about your background, like your story growing up and where you started with all this?
So when I was, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, one of those years, somewhere in that kind of chunk of frame, I had a vision that I was standing on a prairie field, a grass field, and I just watched how the wind over the prairie grasses, it kind of rolls and whatever. And I just watched this wind kind of envelop me as I was standing in this field. And I saw myself like about the age that I am now, standing in a prairie field when I was like 10 years old or whatever. And that feeling of that wind, what had dropped in me was the feeling that there was finally world peace. That was the kind of experience that I had in that particular vision. So I've always kind of carried that. I had preludes to it before that particular vision and what have you. And then as I became a teenager, I was super sensitive to everything and taking on other people's emotions and energies and whatever. And I became kind of a mess and got into some shitty crowds. And I had a friend die of a drug overdose when I was 17. And so that like snapped me out of the whole space. And I started, what the hell is the meaning of life, right? And what's the point of all this? Or just, the kind of the vision I had was like, we're on this rock in this middle of this solar system, this middle of this universe, in this middle of whatever this all is. and we're being forced to go to school or work 9 to 5, and our point of living is to this Monday to Friday kind of dynamic. But like, it just didn't sort of click right for me that that's the point of living on this planet in this middle of this universe. It seems like we should be doing something much more grander than that, from my perspective, rather than just working to pay mortgages or bills or like whatever that the vast majority of this planet is doing. And so there's this thing. This is a bit funny because I had this teacher in high school. He used to kind of mock me or whatever and make fun of me for how long I could stay still. So they actually timed me, and my record was 3.5 seconds. And so in my like teenage development mind, and coming off of like a friend dying, I was like, it's got something to do with that. So I just parked my butt into the floor. I didn't know what meditation was at the time. I'd never seen the idea of it. And I started teaching myself meditation. I'd close my eyes and keep my body completely still for as long as I could. And that was like my practice of meditation at first. And it evolved and grew into a whole bunch of other things. And I eventually got into natural health college, where they would teach meditation as one of the courses to help you handle all the energies that you're dealing with, all the clients and that kind of aspect. And I was like, this is what I got to do. And that was like that moment I kind of figured out what my problem was in life, is that I would absorb other people's energies and emotions, and that their problems and stuff would be running through my space or in my experience of life. Like their anxiety would also be my anxiety, and their relationship problems would start to kind of show up in my life. And so I started learning tools how to separate from that. So I ended up doing a 7-year program in about 3.5 years. It's sort of like a equivalent of a PhD in energy work and meditation that I did in 3.5 years. And then and I've had this penchant towards world peace and kind of a bit of a rebel kind of in my life, in my world. And so looking at the world, it's going sideways, and there's all these kind of, injustices in all the world and so forth like that. So I've kind of like, okay, what can I do here? And then so I got involved with a couple of really large groups handling their messaging so that they could kind of grow the movement. So when your messaging's off, you can get attacks, political attacks, and then it shuts down the movement. When you don't control the message, then you completely lose the message, and then the opponent basically wins. So I was basically tasked with controlling the messaging in these particular movements. And I mean, it wasn't the only one, but like I was the person spearheading the messaging. There's such large movements. And because of that, these movements grew because of the communication, and we were in control of the messaging. The politicians were, who weren't, getting control of the messaging. So they grew really, really fast and very, very, very large. And then what I watched is from the inside, these groups imploded. That's how they died. It was from the inside. It wasn't from the outside. People didn't know how to deal with their stuff. And that's what I was been teaching for a while, is teaching people how to deal with their emotions. And it was really sad for me to kind of watch it. So I've been humming and hawing for about a decade now, starting another movement. And I feel like it's ready in time, and it's just got to be done. Like I have the skills, I have the experience, I have the tools, I have the network, and that kind of stuff. It's just like, I'm probably one of a handful of people on this planet who could pull something like this off. And so I just feel like it's got to be done now. So, yeah.
I would like to know, what exactly does that look like? What do you have planned?
I've got a couple of phases. Phase 2, I keep kind of low profile. Certain people know it and have access to it. But phase 1 is basically a numbers game. So you want to get the number of people engaged and involved. So there's this kind of theory, this loose theory, that if you have the square root of 1% of a given population, you can decrease the crime rates between violence and crime rates by 60 to 90%. And it's kind of loose. There's some backing to it and that kind of aspect. So globally, that's not a very large number. That's about 8,300 people. So I say 10,000 people just for an easy number. So you get 10,000 people regularly meditating together with a focus of peace, and then let's see what it does. And then my next objective will be 10,000 people per time zone, which is roughly 250,000 people around the world. Kind of aspect. And then once there's that many people engaged, then you can start to make decisions as a group that influence the world. So if you've just got like 1,000 people making decisions, let's boycott said company because they're not behaving well, it's not going to really impact it, right? Whereas if you get a lot of people deciding to like, hey, let's spend our lives like this, right? Like the global consensus right now is we spend our lives in a 9 to 5, work to pay mortgages and that kind of stuff, and everybody's kind of born into that agreement or that conditioning. We need to change the agreement that's on this planet. The agreement isn't healthy for 95% of the population kind of deal. So it needs to change. So yeah.
So what makes you say that out of all the people you would be one that would be able to pull this off?
Because I have the experience and the knowledge and what it takes to be able to hold the space for it. One of the problems is the energy dynamics that takes place when you're a point person. You deal with public smears, you deal with a lot of people who throw a lot of energy at you, and most people don't know how to deal with energy. They think they do, like, I'm going to set my boundaries and hold my space and respect my balance and time with, I don't take business calls or whatever after this time. But energy isn't, between this hour and this hour. It's the entire day. So, and so most people have no clue how to deal with it. They might be aware of it, but they don't know how to deal with it. That's why so many people are self-medicated or take medication or drink at the end of the day. I'll just take the edge off, but it doesn't actually deal with the problem. And so when you have like a container, if you will, in the center circle of different situations, there's an aspect where it gets bombarded with the storm of the world, right? And most people don't know how to deal with it. That's why both movements collapsed. When I was in the center circle of them, I watched them both collapse because people didn't know how to, and these were spiritual people, like very, by and large, grounded, dealt with a lot of their stuff type of people, but they couldn't hack the energy. And that kind of aspect. And like, even like famous people that people would know their names couldn't hack the energy. It was just too much for them and that kind of aspect. And so there's like spiritual people who lead others spiritually. They just couldn't hack the change. They're more, so there's a lot of like when pushback energetically, if you will, when you're changing the world. You probably heard the dynamic that people, like humans, don't like change, right? People don't like change. And so when you create change, even though if people want it, there's still pushback even within a person's space. And so most people don't have the skills and tools to kind of deal with that on a global level, an organizational level. They just sort of succumb and buckle to all the pressure, which is a fascinating psychological thing to watch, or psychic or spiritual thing to kind of watch. It's very fascinating to kind of watch. But yeah, that's one of the key points. I'm really good at organizing. I have the ability to kind of organize groups and communities really quickly and get the messaging clear. The telephone game where someone says blue, and then by the end of the like the 30th person, it's it's no longer the word blue. It's like, it's something else, right? And so that communication, that effective communication, is really useful, and my capacity to be able to do that and organize the message and so forth like that. But at some point, once the movement gets going, I'm pulling my hands back from it, so it doesn't become like a guru or this person's the leader kind of dynamic where the structure itself will be able to run itself. There will be no leader in the movement, and it'll be like an organizational, almost democratic kind of dynamic, and that's in kind of phase 2. Once you get that kind of going, and that's the whole point, is a lot of people, when they get into these spaces, want to be the leader, and they have that kind of, there's an aspect of like it attracts arrogance rather than a healthy ego. And so you get a lot of that kind of aspect that comes up. So it's really important that you have the capacity to kind of let go of the outcome of the situation. And so that's when I have the structure that comes in, that people can adapt and move and kind of make it kind of work. So the structure comes from, like, I was tasked with bringing through 3 different large groups together. One was Occupy, which is this kind of anti-Wall Street kind of thing. But basically, Occupy was like this leaderless kind of movement. Like there's nobody to be a leader. That was the kind of whole emphasis of it, and everybody come together and that kind of stuff, which killed the movement because you needed structure, and so nobody had structure. And some of their messages were kind of cool and what have you. And then you had Anonymous, which is still kind of around, and Anonymous is kind of like your internet security, internet freedom kind of dynamic that goes on with that. And then you had Idle No More, which is like Indigenous rights and principles of Mother Earth and stuff like that. So I had these core people from these 3 groups come to me asking me to create an organizational model to bring everything together. So I ended up creating a leaderless decision making model that integrates all these like core principles coupled with a whole bunch of other stuff, best business practices, and all sorts of different things to bring this all together. So that's another reason why I think I've got the skills to do it.
Well, there's such a lot in
Yeah.
there that I had quite a few that I wanted to pick out, and now I'm trying to remember which ones they
Okay.
were, because I know one of them was when you said you were being entrusted, but then you clarified that as you spoke. How do you deal with the energy? Because you were describing like people not knowing how to cope with it, and especially because you said, I'm going to make a bracket here because you mentioned the people that are like spiritual leaders, let's
Mhm.
say, and they didn't know how to handle it all. And I've come across like a lot of people that I've listened to throughout my life so far. I can't remember who I heard this from, but they said that there's all these people that get to a certain level of consciousness that don't deal with certain aspects of the human self. They develop it and it comes out later in not the nicest of ways. I don't know if the wording is the correct one, because they might become sexually abusive, let's say, or have other traits that come up to the surface. So how do you how do you deal with energy? Because especially if you said you're dealing with so many people and you want to create a massive movement, how do you work with it within yourself?
So in my own personal experience, I have over 100,000 hours between my own personal practice and working with clients over the past 20, although my 44, 25 years. And so I have a bucket load of space I've worked. Okay. I've gone through complete life overhauls because they're like in 2014 was probably the biggest one. Um, I felt like my life was off in terms of my integrity. I couldn't figure it out, point it together, like what is it? And so I ended up resetting my entire life. I walked away from my entire life. I had 2 successful companies. I was in cutting edge neurotech. Had a center, been running for a decade. I spent a decade building a life that I wanted in a posh neighborhood, living relatively well, blah, 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 all of the different things, because I couldn't get to my integrity. I was like, something's off. I couldn't figure this out. So I was like, okay, I just got to blank slate it. And I ended up walking away from everything and losing everything, and what have you. And um, so I've rebuilt from that. And so I learned a lot of different things about people's behaviors through that. So in terms of how to answer the other section of your question, is how do I protect myself? I teach psychic tools. So for example, if you go to a carpenter, you learn how to use a hammer, how to hammer things in. So I teach people like hammers, if you will. Um, but it's not just sort of but like, so there's over 400 different psychic tools that I teach. They're all energy psychic tools. They're not sort of like, I'm going to grab a crystal and make my life better. That's a physical tool. You don't, in my opinion, you don't use physical tools to deal with psychic tools. Okay. Most people try to go to the crystals to try to deal with it. It might take the edge off, like alcohol, right? But it's not dealing with the problem or the symptom, in my opinion, what I've seen over the years. So I teach people psychic basic tools. So through the movement, or not the movement, the project that I'm running where people are joining in, I'm actually teaching them psychic tools to protect themselves. So over the term, I'm creating a cohesive group that are learning these tools to protect themselves. Not necessarily that's how I'm teaching it. It's like, yeah, this is to protect yourself. They're just learning, some basic tools, how to make separations from energies, pull their energy back, all that kind of stuff. And so they join this movement. So I get a collective of people who are using these tools in the way they do. I teach them the hammer, but it's up to them what they do with it. And, they build a birdhouse, they build a beautiful home. It's just a tool basically. So I don't end up being like this dogma guru of like, you got to learn it this way or whatever. I'm not a big fan of that. I believe everybody has their own information, and it's just a matter of like getting access to it because we're conditioned not to from early childhood for whatever reasons. And so I get this collective, which makes it stronger and stronger and stronger through the psychic tools and the space and the intentions of all these different people that come into the kind of the container, if you will. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, and so they sign up. I mean, it's $5 a month, or what would that be in pounds? I don't know. It's like £4,
Probably 3 pounds, two, three
3 pounds a
pounds.
month. Join in weekly meditation on Saturdays, um, 5 p.m. I think your local time there. Don't quote me on that one, but and then and then it's like a weekly meditation, and then you have access to my level 1 programs all recorded. I think there's like 20 different tools in there. I've taught it for 20 years, from anywhere from $100 to $1,000 for that particular course, but it's included with the membership and whatever. But you learn these tools of like how to clean out your energy system, how to recognize clean negativity and unclean negativity, how to recognize clean positivity and unclean positivity, and start to find a place. Because a lot of people, because they're craving positive energy, will typically take on unclean positive energy because, hey, it's better than, whatever kind of deal. And so starting to recognize those kind of dichotomies or those like nuances of energy. And so that's part of the level 1 kind of course that's taught in the membership there. So yeah. But yeah, so there's a couple of pieces that go on. But I love what I do. So because I love what I do, teaching the tools, it's sort of like, well, where's the next place I can kind of do this in a certain aspect? Cool, let's do Saturday meditations. Hey, let's do a world peace kind of dynamic. Hey, and then just kind of evolved, and that kind of stuff. And one really cool thing that's going to happen this weekend, I have a contact in Kenya. They had a crummy situation that happened this past week, and so she reached out to me and asked me to do a meditation. And so it's going to be part of the world peace thing, and there's like 500 people there. They're all like Web3 developers and that kind of dynamic, and so they're going to join in after major loss this week with the colleague that died, and so they're going to join in with this kind of meditation group for this one-off kind of thing. So like there's like lots of really cool opportunities that show up with it. Just keep it enthusiastic and engaging. So
yeah, after you were talking, that would have been my next question. Do you feel like you enjoy what you're doing, and are you happy?
Oh yeah. Well, happiness is sort of like, I would say I'm enthusiastic. Okay. So enthusiasm has more concrete physical reality. Happiness has a lot of like, well, what makes you happy? Nobody really knows, right? And so in that kind of aspect, but I love enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, you break down the word into entheos, which translates into God. So if you're not enthusiastic about life, what are you doing? You're not in your divine nature, in your God nature, whatever. The word God's kind of loaded, but like you're not in your spiritual vibration, if you will, if you're not enthusiastic. And so that's, a lot of people talk about like follow your bliss. I say follow your enthusiasm, and like your enthusiasm is usually pretty spot on about what you want to be doing for life purpose and all those types of things. So yeah,
I like that.
Cool.
I like that because I've noticed many times when I'm being asked that question, if you're happy, I have to think about it, and it's loaded with other things, because it feels like happiness depends on certain circumstances or things in the environment being different or whatever. It's interesting because I was thinking as you were talking about gathering people and everything, if you've taken part in any Joe Dispenza's Walk for the World and stuff like that, or is that something that you're not interested in at
the
all?
Walk for the World thing,
that's a big
week
sign.
is when the Ukraine war started. I think it was.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah. So I joined it and I was on it for a minute. I was like, I really do not like the energy of this. It's really irritated. I just felt really like, no, I got to get out of this. And I was like, I had a friend like, yeah, I got to do it. I'm like, cool, Joe Dispenza's doing it. I don't know a lot about him. There's some cool stuff he's put out, but that particular meditation attracted a lot of people, and the energy in it was really harsh, in my opinion. And so I was like, no, I'm out. And so, yeah, a lot of these big names, I've encountered some of these people, not necessarily, not Joe Dispenza, but some of the people in those circles. And there's a lot of like what goes on the surface and what goes on behind the scenes with a lot of these people is very different, which just sucks, which is, I was starting to get into spiritual celebrity circles like 14 years ago. And I was watching behind the scenes what was going on, and their different agents and their different people and how they were behaving. Like one, I'm not going to name drop or whatever, but like there's one person, her staff was turning over like this, like every month I think there was like 15 to 20 people staffed that she had. Every month there was new staff coming in. They did not like her. They knew of her, and they're like, oh my God, it's so exciting to work for so and so. And so they'd all go work, they have an opportunity, and then they would quit pretty much right away, because she was so mean, if you will, to them and that kind of stuff. And this is very common in those circles. And I think it's because they don't know how to deal with the energy of all the people. And they approach these like great messages, but they don't really know how to deal with the energy, as the kind of dynamic. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff like that in those circles.
I understand it. Because of course it's very hard. I find to find people that are authentic in every aspect of their life, with all their faces up front. There was a question that I wanted to ask you. How do you make the distinction? Because you said about tapping into the energy of the group of that walking for the world, let's say. How do you make the distinction between it being something that's being triggered inside of you and it being something from the outside, when there's a, because I believe that every time there's something that we tap into or we see, or there's a little bit of an impact that it has on us, it means that there's something inside of us, there's a mirror that's being reflected.
Yeah, it depends on, there's sort of this point where you work on yourself enough where you start to really get clear on what's going on outside of you and what's going on internally. I call this in the world of pictures. So in terms, and this is the wrap, and this could go really deep, but like in terms of pictures, so let's say let's just use a basic surface level example of pictures. So when you're going out for coffee with someone and you're like, you have something in common, you figure out this commonality. I call that a picture. So you're maybe the same gender, maybe you both broke up with the partner, or maybe, but you have this commonality that shows up and you end up talking about it. And so when you go into a group, regardless of what group, you're going to have your pictures kind of get lit up in your spaces. It's kind of, I call it like a Christmas tree. And so depending on what charges you have on those pictures depends on what's going to happen for you in that particular experience. So let's say you go into a really sketchy area of a big city and you have a really traumatic experience from when you were a child in a sketchy area in a big city. You go there, that picture is going to light up. You're going to be really cautious of everything going on. You're going to be in triggered mode. You're going to be like, okay, what do I do here? Whereas if you don't have that particular picture, you didn't pick it up from a movie or from a friend or whatever, you're going to be in that sketchy area. You might be able to be aware of the sketchy energy, but you won't have the same experience. Okay. So when you go into a group, the same kind of dynamic happens. Your pictures will get lit up based on what's going on in that particular group. If it's a happy group, you'll light up your happy pictures, or maybe you'll light up your limitations, okay, to being able to be like in that happy kind of group. Depends on what's going on. And so so basically that takes your ability to get to know yourself and know your pictures, or what your inner workings. I call it pictures. There's all sorts of other kind of word or whatever, but you need to get to know yourself. And so when you haven't done the work on yourself, and it doesn't mean you have to go to a therapist or do all this inner work per se, like you can experience working through yourself without having to go through those things. But most people, that's pretty rare to find. So I typically recommend people going to get some help or do the inner work on themselves. But there's an aspect of like, when you have that, you've done the work on yourself, you can find your neutrality in those given spaces. And when you've done all the practice of getting to know yourself, then you can discern if it's projection from you going out in that situation, or it's the actual situation itself, maybe both. And then you can discern what's best for you in that particular given situation. But the problem is, a lot of people think they've done the work on themselves through a weekend workshop or whatever, and then they go out and then they start projecting on everybody that it's everybody else's problems. And so it's like, yeah, that kind of, so there's a lot of different things like that. But how do you get clear on that? You got to get clear on your pictures, about what's going on. And I'm not perfect. I've been doing this lots. And so there's the odd time where I even can fool myself. And so you got to have your checks and balances in place with that, what that looks like. The last time I really had a blind spot to something, and it's kind of like almost like an empath blind spot, but like where you believe that, you can see the person in their best potential, but you don't realize what they're actually doing. And you kind of see the bigger picture of what they're capable of and their quote unquote goodness, but you don't look at the BS that's going on underneath, right? And so there's a blind spot. So I was like, okay, what's my blind spot? And starting to kind of look at that. And so I use those situations as mirrors or what's my vulnerability to it? Why am I letting that in my life or my world, and do work on that? Because it's super useful, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah, you're mentioning blind spots, and I'm thinking now it's a blind spot because we can't see it. So it's interesting to me that you said that you recognize that you have a blind spot there, because normally, for me, I've noticed that somebody else. There's times when I find that I'm struggling with things, and I have to reach out to somebody else to help me out here. Is this something that I'm not seeing?
Yep.
You know, because I find it very important to be able to reach out to other people as well. So, do you ever do that? It's from what you've shared so far, before you go any further, from what you shared so far, you sound like you know yourself so damn well that you don't go through many stages of having to reach out to somebody else. But then I believe that we all kind of do sometimes.
You
So,
got to, like, I mean, I will use, if I don't have anybody in my life. So there's people in the audience that, like, I don't have anybody I can reach out to. What I do is I use 3 points of reference in my world. And so if person A comes to me and gives me, hey, this is what's going on. Oh, interesting. I might take it as a grain of salt and, like, whatever kind of deal. But if I get person B comes to me, has no idea who person A is, and they give me the same reflection about, hey, this is what's going on. You're a bit grumpy, whatever. And then I'm like, okay, I'll start to pay attention to that. And then if I get another point of reflection of the same kind of issue or the challenge, then I know there's something going on with me that I got to sort out and figure out. Okay. That's one way to get that accountability when you don't have anybody around you. And the reason I start with that is there are very, very few people on this planet who have more than one person that they can count on or trust that type of direction with. I call them growth friends. It's really hard to find one. In that kind of aspect. And then,
do you have
what's
them?
that? I have a few
Do you have?
people that are in very specific areas that I can go to. So if it's about this subject, then I can go to them about it. Like, it's about this subject, I can go to them about it, that kind of stuff. And as far as like a whole kind of like feedback system with another accountability person, I do not have that. And that's very, very hard. I had that over a decade ago. And that was where, like, the integrity was off of my life and I couldn't figure it out. Broke that integrity, or sorry, not reset my entire life to, like, break that cycle. And then who I thought had my back was totally against me, which is really kind of random. And so there's a lot of, like, very, like, I've learned how to, like, what aspect of that person can I trust and lean on? Because some people are excellent at this, but they're horrible at that. And, like, they have their skills and their weaknesses, right? So you want to, like, you find that kind of dynamic where you need that kind of support. So I have my blind spot supports in place for sure. Absolutely. And that's my biggest weakness, if there is blind spots, because you don't see it. And so, okay, I got this going on. The blind spots will typically show up in, like, a crisis or, like, a really short burst of, like, hey, pay attention to this. And then it gets louder, and then it gets louder, and then it gets louder. And then, oh, okay. Paying attention now.
I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say to that, to be honest, because yeah, it's interesting. I've never have I never heard the perspective of, if somebody it comes from here and it comes from there and it's two different people. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. I'm taking notes on that one, because I totally believe that there have been times when I would have an idea, let's say, and I would want to share it with somebody else, and kind of getting the feedback from it, whether I'm losing the plot or there's something to it, from the risk of things that I'm tapping into. Okay, this is like a normal question. I find normal, but who knows what normal means. What do you do, like, on a day-to-day basis? What does your life consist of? How do you go throughout your day, let's say?
Okay, so my career ties into this, right? And so if I'm
Right.
working, I don't know, 40 hours a week, sleeping 8 times 7, 56. So basically, there's that. But most of my life is, like, energy work or self-care or personal life kind of stuff where I'm doing different things. Some of it I won't share just because it's public. And when you have, like, changing the world kind of ambitions, then it kind of attracts a lot of attention kind of stuff in certain areas. So I like to keep a couple things private. But in terms of day, like, I meditate every day, probably an hour. Do energy work, specifically about an hour, maybe 2 hours.
What does energy, sorry to interrupt, but what does energy work look like in your
Um,
case?
I
What
use the
exactly?
term energy work because it's a more neutral label, but and like I do psychic stuff for an hour or two a day, not tarot cards, but actual like readings, like psychic readings and looking at energy
For yourself or for
for
other
myself.
people?
And then I have my clients as well, and that kind of
Right.
aspect. But for myself, I look at that every day. What energies are interfering? What energies around? What am I creating? What do I want to focus on? And that kind of stuff. And then I'm just looking at my list of like things that I do, and I do lots of like interesting, fun things. Like I might go to a NASCAR event or something like that. That's not very spiritual, if you will.
Hmm.
Um, and that kind of aspect. So, but yeah, there's lots of like cool things to kind of do. But yeah,
Yeah, that would have been my thing. Like, do you ever play in a sandbox, like go out and just be a child or stuff like that?
maybe not a sandbox. Like, I mean, I've got a playground in my garage, and so, um, yeah.
What does that consist of?
What's that?
What do you have in your garage? Like, what's your playground in
Ground like a
there?
literal like not a tree house, but like there's stacks and rock climbing, and then there's swings, and there's like that kind of
Yes.
stuff. And then I have my gym, like deadlifts, and like um, all that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I love it. You've got a little bit of being a kid somewhere in
Okay.
there. I don't know why I have this impression that you're such a serious person, and I feel like maybe because of the weight of wanting to change the world in the way that you do, or maybe I'm just reading you
Yeah.
wrong. I don't know.
I have focus, and so a lot of people consider and intensity. I have high intensity and laser sharp focus, and so a lot of people kind of light up their serious pictures, if you will. But I
Yeah, yeah,
mean, the in my opinion, the lowest vibration in which you can be aware of yourself as a being is amusement or play. If you've lost your sense of play or lost your sense of amusement,
hold on. You said lowest
the
vibration
lowest
is
vibration where in which you can still be aware of yourself as a being is amusement. If you've lost your amusement, you've lost your sense of self. And so if you
oh,
lost your
got it.
play, your amusement, your humor, all that kind of stuff, where are you that you're gone? You're all like
Mm-hmm.
about your body and your victims and pain pictures or fear or whatever, crisis. If you've lost your like amusement and so like you've lost your sense of self and spirit. And so, I have a high intensity humor as well in that kind of aspect. It's not a dry humor, but like, um, yeah, but you got to keep that playfulness. And like sometimes things get so ridiculous that you start laughing, right? And then that's when things actually start to change. When you're like so stressed out, oh my God, I can't take this anymore. I can't take this anymore. And then you get to the point of it's like so ridiculous. Then you start laughing and you're like, oh, that's how I get out of this hole. All right. And then it's like that humor, it gets you out of the situations, right? Doesn't mean you're amused
Yeah.
about the given situation, but you have your vibration back, who you are back, and then you can start to
Mm-hmm.
dig yourself out. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Do you feel like you've gone through a lot of? I feel like I've got all these questions, silly questions, but anyway, do you feel like you've gone through a lot of your, I don't know, shedding? Because I remember you saying about maybe 10, 14 years ago that you had to completely let go of everything that you had built up
Yep.
and believed that you were gonna. Have you had a lot of these stages in your life where you felt that you had to forget all about what you knew about yourself or the world or
Yeah.
reality? Blah.
Take what fits for you and let go of the rest. I do that on a day in, day out, right? And so that happened to be a big one. 3 years after that, I found myself in like, why is this pattern showing up again? And so I had to like course correct and everything like that to that particular piece. But I mean, there's a lot of like, I change, I grow, I evolve, I get a new level of awareness about who I am or reality or physical reality, emotional reality, spiritual reality, all that kind of stuff. And then I like, okay, how do I want to adjust my life to this, and that kind of aspect. And I mean, there's always been like core components that have come along with me in my life, whether it's with myself or a family member or something like that, that have always kind of stayed steady. Um, and but yeah, like I'm a Scorpio in terms of like when I'm born, right? And so my body's like, when's the next time we're gonna change? I'm like, no, quiet down, body. And like that kind of like death and rebirth kind of stuff known for a lot of Scorpios, right? And so, I mean, I've gone through a lot of trials, like and death and rebirth in this life alone, but like, so I'm constantly wanting to grow and challenge all my like pictures and all the stuff I go through, and it's working, past lives and stuff that I'm still recovering from in terms of that kind of aspect, and those types of things.
It's funny because I don't know much about Scorpios, but I've got a lot of Scorpio in my chart. So it's so interesting. It's like some part of me doesn't want to know.
Yeah.
So what? Because you said there's a lot of births and rebirths.
Yeah.
Like, has that been throughout your life that you felt that is it something? Is it a trait that you've learned about?
And I love,
let's say, in life.
Yeah, I actually do like going through a death and a rebirth kind of experience, like a rebirth experience. It's just sort of like, I find it, what's the expression? There's an expression, I misplaced the expression right now, but it just gets rid of all the stuff that doesn't serve you anymore. It's like, whatever, let's do this. Like 2 months ago, June, like a few months back, I decided I'm going to sell my home. And I basically, I'm going to do a private sale, blah, 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 get it sold. It was sold, I think, possession date was July 3rd. And I think I put it on the market and I think I decided to put it on the market on the 10th of June. And then it was on the market on the 17th. And then I had my offer by the 24th, I think. And then home possession was by July 3rd. Whole home move and everything like that. I had my new place and everything like that. Sort of like, it's like high intensity, get stuff done. I don't totally know your whole audience, so I typically say different ones, but
who cares? Yeah. Everybody's watching.
Yeah, all right. And then get shit done, move on, and get on. So I like these high intensity kind of projects, which is partly why I call the World Peace and Freedom Dynamic a project, because it means there's an end date in line and all that kind of aspect. And so it's like a project. So it's like, hey, how are we going to build this? And everybody who kind of hears that said, oh, it's a movement. It's another like movement. Oh my God, blah, blah, blah. Oh, it's a project. Okay. It gives a little bit of like action energy into it rather than just sort of like passive movement of like, social or armchair activist kind of stuff where people just kind of hide at home and don't get involved.
So when is the date, the end date? Do you have one in mind?
I'm looking at June 2026.
Wow, so that's 2 years about from now.
Yeah. And so I watched with like COVID, how quickly within like 3 months, the entire world was having that conversation. Okay. And regardless of whatever political stripe you come with that particular piece, you were having a conversation about it. And there is a component where I watch it happen where the entire world could come together about a conversation. And so I know it's possible for the entire world to come together within like 3 months and have a conversation about something. Okay. Except for maybe the people in the deep, deep Amazon who have never had contact with people, right? They probably even heard about it. What is this thing called COVID? Whatever. But like everybody, it was everywhere. And so there's this kind of component of like, how do we get this conversation into that same consciousness that everybody was talking about and have some sort of agreement of like, yeah, we're talking about this now. So the first thing in terms of the project is getting a conversation going, or the communication space around world peace and freedom. What does that actually look like? And that's, in my opinion, the biggest risk to having world peace is that nobody knows what it looks like. There really isn't. It's just all theories. Okay? Nobody's ever actually experienced it. There's certain like hyper ideals. And if you know anything about manifesting, you always, like say you want to start a business, you're thinking about it first. You're thinking about like, I'm going to have to print out stuff. I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to do that. Maybe it's online. And you're thinking about it before you actually do it. Right. And so when you have a world peace, what do you think about? There's not really much in terms of the pictures and the ideas of like, okay, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And that's the biggest risk because nobody really knows what it is. So part of one of the key emphasis is I'm trying to get people to think about what world peace looks like. So I've gone to like, for example, like Costa Rica to kind of experience what a culture is like that is currently not at war. They're one of 3 countries in the world currently not at war. They don't have a military. And so I went there just like, what is this culture like without war? I mean, there's lots of other things going on, but okay, somewhat kind of like my culture, but not really. Okay, what's different about this? And so I just wanted to be in that kind of experience, to kind of start to kind of frame my mind about what does like world peace look like around this world, and starting to kind of leverage that. And so that's the emphasis. So anybody who gets to hear this, including yourself, my kind of homework or my action I ask people to do is like spend a minute thinking about, what does world peace actually look like? What does the economy look like? Is there a government? Is there money? Is there religion? Is there politics? What does it actually look like if there's world peace in this world? And just like spend a minute kind of looking at that. And then that kind of creates a ripple effect and everything like that. So, sure, I care about you if you join my movement or my project and what have you, and you get, pay me $5 a month or whatever. But the thing I would really want you to get is if you spend a minute thinking about like, what does actually world peace look like? And like that kind of aspect. So, yeah.
I feel like I haven't asked you the most important question so far. Why is it that you want world peace?
Why is it that I want world peace?
So much so that you want to produce this big movement that you have envisioned.
Well, it's a better use of our time on this planet. And there's like, you could lean off of like, say, someone like Elon Musk. I don't know all the ins and outs of his politics and what's behind the scenes for him, but one of his things is, space exploration, right? And he wants to, his idea is like, we're going to explore other planets at some point. And we might get to planets where there's an entire species, kind of like us, where they're dead. And they died because they didn't get off their planet. They were killed by asteroids or whatever. Or we might discover that we're completely alone in this whole entire universe. We're the only, society, the only exist. And then that's scary in of itself in terms of his language and whatever. And so one of the dynamics is like, it just seems, I have this drive around organizing, right? And there's like this need for this planet to be reorganized. And it's not like an OCD thing, but it's like, there's a way better way to do this. I'm not saying I know what it is, but I know there is. And it's sort of like, we're kind of like slaves, and we're slaves to, I don't know if you want to get into like this group or that group who's enslaving us, and it really doesn't matter. What does matter is that we're a slave to our mortgages, or a slave to our bills, or if we do that, then if we don't do that, then we're going to go live in the bush somewhere, and then we can't really enjoy humanity because we have to go ostracize ourselves from the rest of the humanity or the human family, right? And so, but what is the way? I don't know. I think everybody on this planet has a piece of the puzzle, and there's 8 billion people on this planet, and I think every one of them, even the people that are being real jerks right now, even have a piece of the puzzle. And so it's like about pulling it all together to find that like cohesion, that group collaboration where we can kind of like, okay, let's do something better with this. And I don't know, like, I'm in my 40s now, and I think about my, the previous 40 years of my life. If I look at my next 40 years of my life, and like, what the hell is the world going to look like in 40 years from now? Is this even going to be a planet, or are we going to blow ourselves up with nuclear bombs or some other weapon that they're creating? That's so needless. So it's like a personal self-preservation thing. I got people I really care about and what their lives are going to look like in that time frame and what have you. But there's just a better way than blowing each other up all the time, and this divide and conquer mentality that is prevalent all around the world. My God's better than yours. My nation's better than yours. My team is better than yours. Like all these things that are constantly, sports are pretty benign, except in Europe in soccer. But yeah. But yeah.
What's wrong with soccer?
You guys beat each other up over your city soccer teams. It's like,
I don't know. I'm not that person. So.
Yeah, right. But it's pretty aggressive. It can be, or at least it makes the news in where I live about it. So yeah, maybe it's not so where funny. You are. I don't know. Maybe it's just exaggerated.
It is. UK is well renowned for their fanatic ways when it comes to football.
Yeah, football. Yes, correct. And like, yeah. But yeah. But yeah, so
It's
it's time. Like I think it's sort of like it's a time for a rollover of the power structure that's been over probably 10, 12,000 years. Um, and it's time to kind of like let humanity as a whole like have the power, not just like whoever's controlling all the politics and power and money and all that kind of stuff. It's time to like let the other people have a try at it, rather than just the same group of people over and over and over again for eons. Like let,
yeah,
let another group of people take a stab at it.
this is definitely putting a picture card in front of me because see, I've learned I've learned something now from you with the pictures because I believe when you're in that position of wanting to change the whole and wanting peace, let's say, and of course I'm reinforcing this is what I believe. It's in my head, it's putting the question of what's wrong with the world as it is, why does it have to be peaceful when it can be both ends of the same stick, negative and positive, the polarity just mingling. But of course everybody's different and everybody's got different views, and I always bring it back to the self, because it's the macro. You're very much macro and the micro and macro. So you're looking very much at the macro from what I've gathered so
Sure.
far, and from what I've learned throughout my life and my experiences, it all comes back to me. It all comes back to the things that I do, the little things that I do in my life that are gonna influence, because I had this big thing of changing the world and putting this weight on my shoulders of, I think, everybody, near enough everybody, if not everybody, that goes through a spiritual awakening goes through this stage of I need to change the world.
Right.
And it just becomes a big burden at a certain point. And realizing that the change that I bring into the world could be as small as, I don't know, not stepping on an ant, let's say, or doing the little things, doing the practices for myself, and bettering myself, let's say, for lack of better words, just improving my own energy and what I put out there, what I put into the world, even to the point of, like you said, if I join any bigger movements where there's a lot of energy of a lot of people going into it, that the little bit that I put in is going to support and expand that big energy. And just like you said as well, if I don't clear and work on myself and know myself that well, I will never be able to recognize and transmute and transform everything that comes my way.
Yeah, that's the trick, to be able to transmute whatever is coming your way, right? And so, yeah, and I understand the piece where a lot of empaths or highly sensitive people, or a lot of people who go on that spiritual journey and want to get into that space of fixing the world. And that's why I've hummed and hawed on this for about 10 years. And like, and I kind of put it to logic of like, I've got the skills, I've got the network I can tap into, I've got the experience and whatever. I'm like, well, who else is going to do this? And like, there's nobody, like, I know the people that have these abilities, these experience and what have you, and they're not doing it for whatever reason. They just feel demotivated, or it's too big, and then the other side of it is you got these movements going on. There's a really strong gender ideology war kind of going on, at least in North America, if not Europe as well. So there is a natural archetype in humanity around creating movements. It's always been there, whether it was like breaking off from the Catholic Church with like Seventh Day or the Mormons or whatever it was in the 1700s. Like there's always movements. Humans have an archetype of creating movements that's always been there. I don't know why. It's in the Bible and these ancient stories around the world. Let my people go. All these different things. There's always this aspect of an ancient dynamic of humanity of creating a movement. That's part of the dynamic. And so I think probably I'm tapping into an ancient archetype as well. Around movements, and then all the people who kind of go on the spiritual journey that have that I got to change the world are probably tapping into that archetype as well. And it's not a really well known one, because people know the wise old person or the fool or all these different dynamics, but I think a lot of these other pieces are starting to get uncovered right now as well. But that's a whole other story. But yeah, in terms of like why why world peace? Why not everybody? In my idea, like I've got a big long declaration that I created for the project, is that I think everybody has the right to do whatever they want to do, providing it doesn't infringe on another person's rights. And then so you get this balance in dialogue that goes on with that particular piece. Well, my rights are this, and then it infringes upon that person's rights. Why can't I do it? Because I still want to do it, right? And that kind of debate, and that goes on with that. But I think at the core of everybody on this planet, and what I hear more often than not is people just want peace. They want peace in their homes. They want a little bit of peace somewhere where they can get away from all the rubbish and the nonsense in the world. They just want that little space. And I think that's a fundamental human right that is not, just like water, just like food, shelter, peace, in my opinion, is a fundamental human right that is completely destroyed. And I think everybody on this planet should have a right to peace without fear of war, without fear of being killed, without fear of all those types of things. And I mean, there will always be people who have bad behaviors and what have you, but the bad behavior energies are ruling the world right now, rather than the peaceful behavior energies ruling the world right now. And that needs to change, right? That whole like yin yang, you need a little bit of negative and positive in the other, and what have you. Yeah, and I get that kind of component, but there needs to be like a fundamental shift. There's too much destroy of the planet going on right now, and humanity and stuff like that. But yeah,
That's where my little bit comes in of, because you said about each person having their own little piece of peace, right, in their own environment, and knowing that it's there and they're free from war, let's say. And I totally believe that inner peace is found internally.
sure.
So same, it goes back to the self. It goes back to the one, each and every one individual. How do we learn to cultivate that inside of us? And I get it. You can also add the power of the group, of the collective, because it's more amplified then.
Sure.
And I also believe that everybody has a choice, because maybe a lot of people in the world don't want peace. Saying that, I do. This is what and not necessarily globally. I've noticed, like you mentioned, for the little person in the little bubble, that's the one thing that I desire for myself the most. And it's interesting, because when I think of peace, it's not the global one. It really is on a personal level.
Hmm.
And I also know that it being on a personal level is going to reflect externally too.
Sure. Yeah, it creates all these ripple effects and all that kind of aspect. And so, yeah, like I think even people who are like pro-war, if you will, unless it's completely money, and even you can go into that, there's an aspect of like people genuinely underneath it are craving sense of peace. They're trying to get, whether it's hormonally or chemically inside of them, they're trying to hit a spot inside themselves where they feel balanced or at peace, regardless of what the external output of how they do it comes across. There's an aspect internally, they're trying to wire something up. So like, for example, in neurology or brain talk, there's an aspect of like the brain's number one job is survival and homeostasis, is to try to create some sort of balance. So even if it's completely out of whack, what it's wanting to do, it's still doing it to try to create a sense of balance and that kind of aspect. And so so there's a lot of different like components that they're people are trying, even as ugly as it looks, they're trying to find some sort of like thing inside themselves that makes them feel together or connected, or like it's linked up, or it's at peace, or whatever. There's something inside that they're missing, that they're trying to link it up, regardless of how nasty something looks outside. And so if you have this general vibration around the world of peace, where there's like, whatever you want to call it, connectivity, or it's all, there's space for them to like get that level of connection in whatever way psychically across the entire world, then it creates a space for them to like naturally move into that field, if you will. And I've seen this in different environments in like urban centers or whatever, where you kind of alter the energy of that space and people start to kind of match that. Whereas if it starts to get aggressive, then they start to match that. And so when you create the kind of environment, and this comes back to another piece, where where you're talking about where it comes back to inner peace. When people don't have that level of inner strength or resilience or worth or whatever, their sense of inner peace is going to come from their environment or and so the environment is really important as well. And then that can help people get into, especially people who have had a lot of like trauma and war zones or whatever happened in their lives kind of stuff. Their environments are really critical to that kind of sense of peace for their body can finally relax. Then they can go and do their sense of inner peace inside themselves kind of deal. But, yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Cool.
Makes a lot of sense.
Awesome.
So where can people find you if they want to join your movement?
You can go to worldpeaceandfreedom.com.
Okay. Yeah. Anywhere else? Like, I mean, after this, you can send me all your details now. I'll put them in the description so people can just go find you wherever you are. So is that all? Is just your website? Can they find you anywhere like Facebook, socials, let's say?
I mean, yeah, there's stuff there. But the best place is worldpeaceandfreedom.com. That will give you the best kind of access to everything. Everything will be there. So just one point is good. But yeah, all right. Well, awesome. Thanks, Phoenix.
Well, thank you very much for being here.